Imperva protects applications wherever they live and at the pace of development. From securing applications at runtime to protecting APIs in any cloud environment, only Imperva offers a unified solution across edge, application, and data to help you achieve more and save money. Start a free trial today and quickly protect your web applications at securityweekly.com/Imperva.
Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Amit Elazari about creating partnerships for better security policy and got a preview of Intel's Project Circuit Breaker to improve hardware hacking. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella, and it's just about time for the news. But first, do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests. We make the URLs easy. Complete the form and we'll review suggestions monthly, and we'll reach out to you once reviewed. We also have a few fun webcasts coming up. First, join us February 16th to learn about validation techniques within applications. Then join us March 2nd to learn 5 things you can do to catch more bad guys. Finally, join us March 10th for an intro to KQL queries. Also, join us this Wednesday, February 9th, for a full live stream day from 1 to 6 p.m., I think Eastern, with Polarity for a chance to win cash prizes and a Samurai Sword trophy. To register for any of these webcasts, visit securityweekly.com/webcasts. Don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings, as always, at securityweekly.com/on-demand. Woo. All right, so that was out in one breath because we've got a lot of news here this week, Mr. Kinsella, and it's kind of across the board. So I'm going to start with, just going to start with number 1 on my list and talk about HTTP3 vulnerability. And this was more about someone was looking at an H2O server. They were playing around with the streams and frames, the way that HTTP3 and HTTP2, for that matter, is set up and looks quite a bit different protocol-wise from HTTP1. And long story short, it's kind of a familiar vulnerability that you can assert to a server that you have a stream of data coming, but you can either send that data out of order, or you can actually just explicitly omit a couple of those frames, and then the server might make some assumptions about has a frame been initialized, has a state been initialized, and so forth. And when it gets confused about that because we have a bad actor of who's sending these frames in, bad things can happen. So to me, this was more about complexity of HTTP3. It's going to be a little bit harder to build mental models for testing, but also I was kind of thinking, took a step back and thinking of this, and like, we have another project for HTTP3 and for Quick, for that matter, new protocols, but still written in C, and kind of wondering, okay, did Go or Rust exist at this time when this project was being launched? And the initial launch for this was back in Christmas 2014. So Go 1.3 did exist around that time. Rust didn't exist around that time. So maybe it's sort of a rhetorical question of either of why did they not choose, why did they just stick with C? Or what would it take now that an 8-year-old project is kind of mature to say, what if we actually re-implemented this in Go or Rust? So that was where my brain went on this. And I'm not sure if I'm going to have to tap the mic and hope that I didn't send John to sleep. And John, are you out there? Where's your brain gone?
First, I want to take a moment and appreciate that they came out with HTTP3 to support the Web3 people. I think that's really kind of them to provide us that new version of the protocol, because that's the only reason it exists. That's interesting, and that's humor, listeners. I hope you guys get that. I think you do. Yeah, I thought Rust was around a tiny bit longer than that, but Go is an interesting one. I'm more than happy to use it in microservices and things like that, backend services, as a server itself. I mean, I understand Go is written for servers, and it's got a lot of components in there for that, or a lot of aspects for that. As a pure low-level library, or quote unquote, that built-in interpreter sort of gets in the way, at least mentally in my head. But do you care about that? I suspect a lot of folks over at Google will go, dude, that's not a problem. So that's probably my own little interpretation. I agree with you in theory. I hope we get less things moving forward and ongoing. And I hopefully there's been a little more drama going on over at the Rust management, whatever they call their foundation, since the last time we talked about it. So hopefully that stabilizes out. But I'm sure it will. But yeah, there's definitely, I think, in the last few years better languages to use than C. And it's interesting. I wasn't thinking about language on this one so much. It's when we talk a little bit later and one or two of the stories, there was a interesting use of language. So yeah, I don't have too much to add on this. This is, I'm glad I got spotted and fixed compared to some of the other ones we see which drag on for ages and ages. Yeah, we got a lot. Let's just keep going. I'll shut up.
Yeah, let's keep going. No, well, we don't want you to shut up because I think there's some good language that, speaking of language and F words, this had fuzzing built in support. So that was one other thing I wanted to mention about this H2O project is not only did it have built-in support for LLVM's libfuzzer, but importantly, they put together some corpus and test inputs so that the fuzzer could be effectively run. So yeah, it's written in C, and maybe, in the grand scheme of things, would love to, as much as I would, love a pony, I'd love to have everything written in safer languages, perhaps. But they're still at least acknowledging a lot of good security things here. So, John, you wanted to, there were some language things that were jumping out to you. Take us in that direction.
Now I got to find it. Man, we went through so many stories, and you got my hopes up when you mentioned the F word. I'm like, what do we get to talk about now? And then I thought about Fsharp, and luckily it was neither of those things.
Fortran.
Let's see here. I know it's one down at the end of what we're talking about. No, that's back off error. So let's go and hit up. You had an article in there about Frida. And I thought this was interesting. So, really good documentation around Frida. I wish they had a little bit better introduction on it. I'd seen this many years ago, and when I was doing more instrumentation type stuff, and I caught my ear to see you talk about it again. So Frida, to sort of quickly bring people up to speed, is a framework that allows security researchers to do binary instrumentation on a existing binary. So you're able to sort of understand, usually an existing binary. So you're able to understand, do research on it and see what's going on, and sort of put some hooks in there without having to, at least from my understanding, manipulate the binary itself by hand. What's interesting about it to me is you do that through JavaScript. I think they support TypeScript too. So it's a pretty limited number of folks out there who I think are going to be using this day in, day out. I think for the rest of us, it's sort of interesting to look at and go, oh, hey, this is, if you're looking, we have another article coming up about how to get into ethical hacking and security. I think if you wanted to get into doing malware analysis or even just binary analysis in general, this could be an interesting way to start getting going there, but you probably have a little bit better understanding, I think, than what they expect you to already be at least walking quickly, if not running, before you come to this framework. But an interesting thing to look at. At least that's my point of view on it.
Yeah, I brought together kind of these three, Frida and InsecureShop and this Want to Be an Ethical Hacker, Here's Where to Begin. These articles on the educational aspect, because we did a couple of the Security Weekly hosts did a webcast on how to build a lab. And I know this was something very interesting to you too, John. I think you've also got some great ideas about some different types of home labs. So I more brought these together as supplements to that, as well as for our listeners. What kind of questions do you have, or where would you like to get started, or what are some of the things you feel like you get tripped up on? Because I think we can either bring you something like Frida, bring you some resources and references to help, or this would be a great thing to say, hey, John, walk us through running Docker and Docker, which I think might have to be my running gag for the year now, because you mentioned it with such glee, John.
And actually, thank you. You reminded me. It's InsecureShop is what really caught my eye. Frida was interesting, but it was the next tab over. I hadn't quite got far enough. So with InsecureShop, we don't just have, damn vulnerable shop written for as an Android app, but it's written in Kotlin, which we talk about, I don't know, probably close to never on this podcast. We've talked about it occasionally, but it's a little more niche languages. And I thought this was interesting from the point of view of, okay, how do we make something insecure? We're just talking about C. Well, I don't know. Let's use a pointer, and you're going to be off to a running start quite quickly, right? In something like a language where, I'll be honest, I wouldn't recognize Kotlin if you showed it in front of me, I don't think. So if someone needs to start doing some work with Kotlin, or they need to come up to speed with it or something like that, hey, the extension is KT. Like I said, I knew nothing about this. This is going to be very, very useful. So I think from that point of view, this is really great. And that's sort of what really caught my eye about this. It is just another, damn vulnerable sort of in a way. But the exciting part for me is it's in a language which doesn't get a lot of exposure. So people want to pick up a language and play with it. And one of the things we talk about is, a language needs to have maturity. You can tell the maturity of a language by the security tools and that ecosystem around it. So I think this is sort of an interesting start for that.
Yeah, and that last point, that was the point I was going to make. So I'm just going to build on that in the sense that, like you, I'd be like, wait, is that sort of Java-esque Kotlin? My knowledge of Kotlin is not deep at all, and that's where I wanted to say too. It's that I know of teams, orgs that are building mobile apps in Kotlin. But at that point, then we have to say, as the AppSec, what have you done for me lately? To invoke my one of my favorite songs from Janet Jackson. Do we have the tooling? Do we have the source composition analysis, the SAST, anything else that we might find useful, or at least we want it to be useful as a security tool to say, sure, choose whatever language you have, but let's make sure we have the primitives in place so that we can actually walk through and keep it secure. And that's where it's a good conversation to start with Kotlin, as much as we see an article you highlighted, John, about speaking of the basics, just throwing some MFA out to developers. So the developers' accounts are no longer, or more difficult to be targeted by account takeover attacks.
Yeah, this was a fun one. And I don't know, part of me wants to say, why didn't it happen sooner? But I don't think that's legitimate. I think that's just sort of an internal, and no, I mean that very sincerely. I'm not trying to rip on these guys. I think what they're doing is really great. And I think we've just been talking about, both on the show and at work and everything else, 2FA and multi-factor authentication has become such a common thing to talk about over the last few months that I think that's why I had that reaction. I think it's great that what they're doing. So what they are doing, the NPM organization that runs the NPM thing, which a lot of us have on our machines for installing all these JavaScript packages, which we frequently don't keep track of, they decided to take the top 100 packages and make it mandatory for the maintainers to use two-factor authentication, which I think is really great, right? So that's a pretty decent step that's so easy to do. Some of the stuff I'm doing now is like trying to how do we make security easier for commoners out there? Like, a small company doesn't have a security person. Right. And there's a lot of these type of things like this. Is like, dude, just turn on two-factor authentication. Make sure you've got some password complexity. There's some really basic things you can do to just get security going and make things a lot easier. And this is a great example of it. So I think they're leading here. I'm not aware of, off the top of my head, I'm not aware of other open source groups doing something like this. I'm sure they probably do, but it's just not on my radar. But I thought this is a really great thing to put out there and sort of think about. And like, for the rest of us, here, the homework for the week. If you've got a GitHub account, and if you're listening to this, you probably do. Do you have 2FA turned on? And do you have your GPG public key on there for setting your commits? These are both super simple things. Get them in place. There's no reason not to do it. So, listen to the next 20 minutes of us, and then off you go to GitHub and do some work.
Off you go. And GitHub supports Touch ID as part of their MFA. So you don't even, obviously we will extol the virtues of FIDO keys, but I found that really convenient for me, being in the Mac ecosystem that I am. That Touch ID was super simple. That's a great segue. You set this up nicely for the OSSF projects, the Alpha and Omega, or as John Pertwee in the Three Doctors likes to say, Omega is the pronunciation, because he was one of the founders of the Time Lords. And I just had to throw that in there for those listeners who are paying attention to the top hat that I've been wearing for ages. But the better point on the AppSec related part of this article is that the OSSF is taking two different projects. One, they're giving kind of call it white glove bespoke work for a lot of critical open source projects to say, we think you need help. Here's how we will help you, rather than just yell at you to get better. And then so that's the alpha side. So the first and the last. And then the last side of things will be the omega, which is here's some tooling, here's some things that we can help for you. I can't remember, it was well over 100, I think 1,000, some number like that, of additional open source repos that say, rather than just tell you
10,000.
You should be doing something better. Yeah, thank you, 10,000. Here are some tools to help you at least know what the problem is. But I think there's still this catch here that it's very easy for everybody to be like, yeah, long sigh. We know that there are problems. We just need hands on keyboards to help us do the work. So that's why it's really positive to see the NPM doing that adoption, and hopefully, here's my Sisters of Mercy music reference. The first, last, and always improving security here from this project will be helpful.
Yeah, excuse us while we entertain ourselves with our internal jokes.
Pretty much.
This is really great. And we're hearing more and more about OSSF. So I think it's going to be an interesting year from that point of view. And they've been around it's not like they're brand new, but they're really starting to, a lot of stuff they've been working on and a lot of the projects and meetings they've been having are really starting to get some traction, which is great. And while I do often poo-poo this, what's interesting, this article to me is, who wrote this? Stephen? Don't know. Not a bad thing, I just don't know an author. But what's interesting about this article is the number of VPs that they've got from different companies and sort of senior leaders at these companies. So like, a VP of product at Code Notary. I saw there was at least one VP in here from Google. They've got Marcus Rusinovich. Wow, I pronounced it right. Yep. From Microsoft. So they've got, this is getting a lot of high level attention from a lot of places, and I think that's really great. There's another one in there. Anyways, it's great to see this getting a little more attention. And I think it's sort of, an article like this to me is the, well, hey, let's go ahead and said, I'd say this article is actually the omega compared to the alpha of our last half hour talking about policy and CTF, or not CTF. Anyways, keep going. But you know what I'm trying to say, right? It's the bug bounty, that word. CVD, it's the other half of that. That's sort of great to have that type of thing from a policy point of view. And yes, I understand bug bounty is not policy, but you can have a policy to have a bug bounty. So that's sort of great on that side, and I think this is sort of almost doing the equivalent from a bottom-up engineering point of view. So I think it's great to see this in here as well.
Yeah, and I wanted to throw that in there. I think hopefully in 2023 we'll be able to come back to this episode and say, cool, there was this got executive buy-in. This, as you were pointing out, a lot of VP attention that were pushing on this, and hopefully there was some actual change that happened, more than just 100 NPM developers turning on MFA, which is a good step, but it's what that necessary but not sufficient, and not quite as a counterpoint here. But I wanted to pull in this article about the Apache Log4j team talking about the Log4Shell vulnerability patching process, and I am trying to resist making this the year of Log4j, but I thought this was a new and at least a different and interesting angle, in the sense of we get postmortems about organizations that have to react to things like Log4Shell. This was our all hands on deck. This was our forensics. Did we see signs of probing? Did any of those probes succeed in exploitation? Who's writing up the "we take your security seriously" when there's a breach, et cetera, and so on. This was really interesting because it's looking at the developers in an open source project, quite often neglected until everybody realizes that they have a Log4j installed somewhere. And they have their own frustrations as well, because I think there was a choice quote near the end where even the developers, the quote, are saying, it's been disappointing to see how many users are still on Log4j 1.x. So there's a lot of things that, for as much as we can talk about alpha and omega and these projects, there's a lot of change that's difficult. There's a lot of inertia to go back and deal with, to try to have a clumsy physics metaphor in here.
I think that's it's an interesting way to talk about an issue which is going on here. That last part in particular around the Log4j one, in that, it's one thing to write software. It's another thing to have the security dude come and tell you, dude, your stuff is broken or insecure, you need to go fix it. But it's yet another thing again for if I've got something that's working, and hell, even with my current hat on, where I've been, writing this current system for 6 months, 8 months, something like that. If you came in the morning and told me, and here's even an example for you, but I'll set it up. If you came in and told me that I've got to move an existing library which I already use, and it's working, and it's good, secure, and all that type of thing, and you're telling me that I have to go and start updating it, and this is something that I'm aware of, like the example I'm about to give, and I might have talked about before, but dude, that's work. That means I've got to stop everything else I'm working on. I've got to okay, I've got other deadlines. I've got other stuff going on.
Yeah.
We've got an example of that coming up here in another article too. But okay, so Amazon Web Services, the Go library. There's version 1, version 2 of their SDK. I've got both of those versions in my code right now because in some cases, I believe the version 2 stuff is still, even though it's released, I think it's still not quite up to par where we want some things, functionality-wise. But at some point, I'm going to have to go and take all the V1 code and rewrite that to use the V2 code because they're not backward compatible. That's one example. And actually, a second example with Amazon is CDK versions 1 and 2. My illustrious co-founders go tackle that one. Best of luck to them. But these are two things which are like, I'm aware of, not alone everything else in my code, which I'm not aware of. And this is a small project. So it's quite easy for someone who has, if you think about where's Java used, it's going to be used in enterprise. So imagine 50, 80,000 lines of code plus. Where's the Log4j? Okay, you can find it pretty easily. We all know how to use grep. And actually people are saying that they were having hard times finding it. So that's sort of weird to me, but I guess if you renamed the library. And what I'm saying is it's a much bigger deal, and I get that aspect of it. I mean, I for anyone who follows me in any of the socials, I've when this whole thing started last year, I was throwing memes around, sort of making fun of it, and I do still to a degree think it's getting hugely overblown. But that's sort of it's still important, and a lot of these type of things we have to sort of bang the drum like that to get attention on it. So I get it. But it's understandable, and I try to be compassionate to those who are trying to deal with it, like the fine folks over at the Log4j project. So it is good. This is a good read, the interview here for people who, it's very easy to point the finger. I think I might have even said before, I'm trying to remember if I did say, because I don't want to spread. They were having, let's phrase it this way. They were having issues supporting the original version of Log4j, the 1.0 tree. That basically had been thrown away. They weren't expecting anybody to use it, which makes it very difficult to patch. So, in this interview talks through some of those things, and, what's it like from those guys' point of view, the other side of the fence, and it might be a good read for people, not that long, to sort of understand, what it's like as an open source maintainer to deal with some of those things and have people in the community telling you that you're horrible people and you've broken their software and you're being attacked and blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, it's back to our mental health thing. It's we're all humans, and, even though I know myself, probably even on this podcast, I've said harsh things from time to time, we are all humans, and we do make mistakes occasionally, have reasons for the things we're doing.
Indeed. And I think, and yeah, you use the term there, compassion. We've talked over the years about empathy, and there are absolutely some fun and funny memes, of course, and it's easy to make the jokes, and some jokes, it sort of goes that idea. Are you punching up, punching down with a joke, or are you also just seeing, what if what's a follow-up question? Why are things pretty hard to patch, or why was something difficult? And once you get beyond the initial punchline, it's like, oh, I didn't realize that. And that's one of the reasons we actually have been, one of the themes of this episode has been talking about languages. And, I was picking on H2O for that matter, for being in C. Why must we be in C still? But going to Go, Rust gets rid of an attack class, getting rid of that memory safety issues, but it doesn't get rid of every issue. And I think I'll probably be, this will be, I know, bingo cards, this will be my go-to topic to always point out once we get rid of memory safety issues, for the most part, we're still going to have other issues. And I pulled up one Argo CD. Here is a vulnerability in Go code. And John, you also came across a lovely vulnerability with two of my favorite words in it: path traversal. So let's you brought that gift. Let's throw that over to you to walk us through that.
Yeah. So this is I'll start with Argo, because unfortunately when this one came out, I'm like, shit. I'm with my CNCF tag security hat on, security tag, whatever we call it. I'm a co-lead of the team, which is doing a code review right now on Argo. And this hasn't been released. We haven't released findings or anything like that. This is something we've been working on since November. It's part of a graduation for a project. For a project to reach the graduation state in the CNCF is to go through a code review or go through a project review. So for this lovely little treat to land right in the middle where we're looking at the code, it's like, oh, lovely. At least it didn't come out afterwards, so I do appreciate that. And that's what I was talking about before. It's like I probably wore one or two hats too many and a little bit too much juggling. So just the time for myself personally to try and get to this, and I haven't really looked at this. Even this, I meant to look at this code this weekend and I haven't had the chance. But so that's to bring sort of a personal aspect to it. That's what's going on with that. It was a my understanding to date is there's an ability to put malicious content into your YAML, which is going to be processed by Argo, and that would allow firing up extra resources into a Kubernetes cluster. For those who don't know, Argo is a CI/CD package designed to be used with Kubernetes. And it's actually, there's 4 components to it that together make this system for doing builds, dynamically scaling builds across a Kubernetes system. It's pretty neat, actually. It's got a bunch of people working on it, a bunch of really great folks. So that's that one. And then the second one was the CVE, so 2021-4525. And yes, I did bring this up initially because I saw in my mailbox the word path, or the words path traversal. I'm like, I know somebody would like to see that. Oh, yes. But then I went looking for the actual, what do we call it? The website for it. Like, was there an announcement? Where's can I see it in the code repo? What's going on? And those things were unfortunately a little weak from my point of view. So the GitHub, I'm going to reach out to them. I don't know these guys, but also hey, I'll go and say hey. On their Apache security disclosures page, there's no mention of this. In the Git commits, I couldn't see a mention of it. On their website, I couldn't really find a security area. I found like a mention of a security area in some of their source code for a website on GitHub, but I couldn't actually see it. But anyways, so that's partially the reason why I'm using this link from VulnDB. The second thing is I sort of like to what they have across the top here, and I thought it was worth a 30-second conversation for us. Sorry, something in the page caught my attention. But so, they got CVSS. I saw OpenWall. I'm like, wait, this isn't OpenWall. This is Apache James. But Apache James is a, as you can guess, coming from Apache, it's a Java-based thing. And James is a mail server, which has got basically a bunch of other server components stuck together with some glue. One of the things they use is a package called Sieve, which is a mail filtering package. And they've got a managed sieve. So basically, long story short, in there's ability to do a path traversal through that. But anyways, back to what I want to talk about on this. We got a CVSS score. We know how those work, hopefully. And then the next 2 boxes in the top center of this page, which we're linking to in the show notes. Current exploit price, $0 to $5,000. So they're obviously they're showing a tiny bit of threat intel here and giving you a slight sense of what's going on and if this is being having money thrown at it. And then to me, what caught my interest was the third part here is an interest score of 0.13. So in other words, no one's really using a Java-based mail server in 2022, so it's not getting a lot of attention. Or a lot of people really talking about it on public mailing lists or things like that of like, hey, how can we get an exploit or that type of thing. But, some of us who've used the threat intel tools, we've seen this type of information like this before behind large invoices. So I thought it was sort of cool for people to be able to see this and get a sense of what that looks like out there in a free public link. And I'm guessing you can browse around the rest of this VulnDB website. I haven't been here for a while, so this to me is new. But see how these scores and prices compare to some of the other vulnerabilities which we've talked about. So for those who want more homework, could be interesting to go and type in Log4j in here and see what comes up and what type of an exploit you have on there. And then when you're done with that, bring it back to Discord and we'll talk about it. Like and subscribe.
Great homework. Yeah, like and subscribe, and also drop into Discord if you'd like to help with some of the or just what does code review look like, security reviews, and the work that John is doing within the security tag. Drop into Discord and ask him a couple questions or find out. It's a great way to participate, learn some security chops. I think
we love that.
Yeah, one of the things the risk scores, the exploit price, interest score, I actually glossed over that. That didn't catch my eye. But now I'm gonna have to go back and play around with that because I find it interesting just to think, how are we decorating vulnerabilities about risk, different ways going beyond CVSS. I think the one other thing I did want to talk about path traversal was just as a more general comment about talking about input validation and going back to the idea of when AppSec teams are talking with developers. To me, path traversal it's a bit lazy if we just say it's an input validation issue, because it's more about normalization and canonicalization of data, meaning you have either a URL, you have a file system path. How do you normalize it, and do you do that normalization before or after a security check? And this is going back to the ancient times of like IIS double decode. That was the one. I think actually either Mark Rasinovich or Dave Litchfield, one of those names from history, was talking about the these types of problems and saying you can still have valid input, but if your security checks aren't normalizing it, and you're missing maybe some sandboxing, so that even if you do let a ... get through, that there are other controls that are going to mitigate what that impact could be. So once again, those are some of the reasons I enjoy bringing up these ideas of something like path traversal, in addition to just that they're super simple to exploit. Now, John, I know we're getting low on time, but I think maybe a wrap up here. We have sort of a combination of the new Cyber Safety Review Board that's bringing up policy, looking at Log4j. Don't necessarily want to beat the dead log horse of that, but we did have this other article that's a much longer article now from Phil Venables about part 2 of building successful security programs. And I think you've touched on a couple of those aspects of building a security program, from looking at your comments around, looking at the article on the Log4j devs, as well as, oh shoot, I need to go and you're telling me I got to go, find some Log4j and patch it. I need to invest some security engineering time and update this. These are engineering challenges to go through. And this article touches on a couple of those concepts and figure out how do you approach them. These are problems you're going to run into. So I don't think I have enough breath left to dive into it on a deep dive here, but let's give you the final words on this area.
Okay, well, one moment. Let me sort of catch my breath. Okay. This is, we both have a lot of respect for Phil Venables, and when we see his articles, we tend to throw them in here. You grabbed this one first. It was funny as I'm sort of scrolling through it. It's his articles have this sort of, they have an academic feel, but it's not very. It doesn't go too deep into that, right? So at the same time, for those who know, it doesn't look like it was like typeset in LaTeX. But from the reason I mentioned that here is when you start looking at it and sort of scanning through, okay, well, it starts off with like secrets of successful security program, blah, 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 blah. Established sources of funding. I'm a security guy, but I'm also a startup guy. So as soon as I see the word funding, I'm like, hello? I'm like, oh, wait, no, I'm here. I'm not begging a VC. By the way, if today VC is listening, I'm happy to beg you. It's another great read from him. And it's funny as I read through it and just scan through it right now, it feels like a lot of the things we've seen or been exposed to over the last few years in sort of different parts. But it is long, but it's not crazy long, and it's a fairly quick read, I think. with just enough pictures in it. But I think he's able to, his way of talking and his style of writing and communicating like this, I think is for those who haven't been exposed to this or need to expose other people to it. When you've got sections of things like manage your attitude, talking about what happens when something goes wrong, or how to take care of yourself, or how do you handle conflict, keep your long haul of your career in mind, and this is all being talked about in one article, one blog post, along with remember we're talking about success of a security program, and I suddenly started going off and talking about your attitude. So I think that's pretty great. He actually does have 20 points down here near the end. Wow, that's impressive. Yeah, it's a good read. Again, as with everything else, it's in our show notes. Go take a peek. Come ask us questions in Discord or Twitter or LinkedIn or. I'm still not on TikTok, I'm happy to say, but it's definitely worth 5-10 minutes of your time to read this, I think.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that, John. And as you said, come give it a read, and if you've got questions, or also talking about anything going on with the CNCF and then security reviews, those types of things, come into Discord, ask us both. John, of course, is going to give you much better answers than I will. And for that, I'm also going to say thank you, John, for joining us this week. Thank you to all of our listeners. Please subscribe, give us a like, check out the show notes. And since John doesn't have a TikTok yet, we're going to make him watch some Rhythm Nation 1814. That's going to be the dance that we do for his initial TikTok release. And while we're working on that, we'll see you next week on Application Security Weekly.